In this section, we're going to talk about senior debt, but I first want to review the capital stack. As you recall from earlier in this course, we have senior debt at the top, subordinated debt in the middle, and equity below that. This is ranking in terms of priority from top to bottom, and the return profile is the inverse, with equity having the highest return profile and senior debt the lowest. So let's take a closer look at the senior debt section of the capital stack. There are a few main components of senior debt. Typically, companies have a revolving line of credit facility, and then they may have various tranches of term loans, A, B, and C in this example. This whole section makes up senior debt. Typically, this could represent up to 50% of the funding of an acquisition. And that equates to somewhere in the order of 2 to 3 times debt to EBITDA. So if you know a company's EBITDA and it's a stable, fairly bankable business, you could assume that perhaps banks would lend 2 to 3 times its EBITDA for their senior debt. Or another way to look at it is 2 times interest coverage. So whatever the interest expense of this debt would be, the company has to generate sufficient cash flow to cover that 2 times over. The typical providers of senior debt include the commercial banks, credit companies, and insurance companies. Now let's take a look at how senior debt can enhance equity returns. So here's an example of a capital stack: senior debt, subdebt in the middle, and equity at the bottom. Over time, over 3 to 5 years, as this business grows, what's going to happen is you're going to see that the equity piece has expanded significantly. The subordinated debt piece is exactly the same, and the senior debt piece is slightly smaller as it's been repaid over its amortization period. So the value of the business has grown, but the majority of that benefit has gone to equity because senior debt's been paid down and subordinated debt has remained the same. So this is how private equity firms achieve their internal rates of return, and they may be targeting anywhere from 20 to 30% returns. So it's important to ensure that the amount of equity invested up front delivers that adequate internal rate of return, at least for a financial sponsor. And if there is a funding gap to fill, it's often filled with subordinated debt. Senior debt is maxed out. The equity component that's required is put in place, and hopefully subordinated debt fills that gap. This has been a very high-level overview of several concepts that are very important in corporate finance. I would suggest that for more detail, you could look at taking our fixed income fundamentals course, which will walk you through bond pricing, yield to maturity calculations, etc. You could also look at our valuation course that covers various valuation techniques and looks at the use of leverage in enhancing returns. And then finally, all of our financial modeling courses will include debt modeling, and we'll look at the use of leverage in calculating internal rates of return and see how this actually plays out by modeling out in Excel.